The shelter secrets. Eleanor Hayes lived her days in quiet repetition, each sunrise tethering her to a life that felt more duty than desire. The cabin she shared with her husband, Thomas, stood at the edge of the settlement, solid, sturdy, and utterly cold. Thomas was a man of few words, his affection buried beneath calloused hands and an unbending devotion to survival. Eleanor longed for warmth, not just of hearth but of heart, yet she received only silence across the dinner table and the occasional brusque nod in place of tenderness. Her world might have remained confined to routine had it not been for the night she ventured into the woods. The air was damp, the sky bruised with clouds, and the sound of a groan stopped her in her tracks. Beneath the trees lay a man, bloodied, half-conscious, his chest rising in shallow breaths. His clothes marked him unmistakably, Comanche. Fear jolted through her. The settlement had been whispering of raids, and she knew what discovery would mean. For a long moment, she froze, torn between terror and compassion. Logic screamed to turn away, to return to her cabin and forget what she saw. But the sight of his trembling hand clutching the earth awakened something else, an echo of her own buried loneliness. She knelt beside him. His dark eyes flickered open, sharp with pain, yet piercing in their intensity. "Please," he rasped, though perhaps it was not her tongue he spoke. Still, she understood. Every instinct told her she was crossing into dangerous ground, but Eleanor slid her arm beneath his shoulders and hauled him up with surprising strength. Step by step, she guided him toward the cabin, heart hammering against her ribs. She could already hear the voices of her neighbors if they ever knew. Traitor, whore, outlaw's woman. Yet she could not leave him to die alone in the dirt. When she pushed through the cabin door, Thomas was not home. He had gone to trade supplies, and fortune, if it could be called that, gave her the moment she needed. She laid the stranger upon a cot in the corner, lit a lantern, and examined his wounds. Blood soaked his side where an arrow had grazed him, the flesh raw and angry. She fetched water, cloth, and a steady hand she did not know she possessed. As she worked, she caught herself studying him. His face bore the harsh lines of a warrior's life, yet there was a quiet dignity beneath the blood. When his gaze met hers again, a strange shiver ran through her, not of fear, but of recognition, as if she had been waiting for eyes to truly see her. She pulled back quickly, ashamed of the thought. The cabin walls seemed to press closer as she listened for Thomas's return. If her husband walked in now, everything would unravel. Still, she pressed a cloth to the wound, whispering to the stranger to hold still, though she doubted he understood her words. Her own breath trembled in the silence between them. At last, she stepped back, hands trembling, cloth stained scarlet. He would live, at least through the night. Relief warred with dread. What had she done? A single act of mercy might well condemn her. The door creaked then, and her heart lurched. She hastily draped a blanket over the man, dimmed the lantern, and turned toward the sound. It was only the wind rattling the wood. Still, her pulse refused to slow. She returned to sit by the fire, staring at the flames, the weight of her decision heavy on her shoulders. Thomas would be home before dawn. The stranger, this Comanche, would still be breathing under her roof. Eleanor folded her hands tightly in her lap, whispering to herself as if the fire might absolve her. No one must know. And yet, deep inside, another voice stirred, quieter, dangerous, but impossible to ignore. For the first time in years, she did not feel alone. Whispers in the dark. Morning light spilled into the cabin, and Eleanor rose with a heart weighted by secrets. Thomas was already gone, his axe missing from its place by the door. He had left without a word, as he often did, vanishing into the forest to cut wood or hunt. His silence used to sting, but now it was a blessing. She turned to the corner where the stranger lay. His breathing was steadier, though his skin still glistened with fever. Eleanor approached with a basin, cloth, and herbs she had hidden beneath her apron. When she pressed the damp cloth to his brow, his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she expected hostility, some reminder that he was Comanche and she a settler. Instead, his gaze was calm, searching, as if he were trying to read her soul. He said nothing, but his eyes lingered long enough that Eleanor felt the warmth rise in her cheeks. "You'll need to stay quiet," she whispered, glancing toward the door. "If anyone hears," she did not finish. He seemed to understand, nodding faintly before closing his eyes again. The hours passed in quiet labor. Eleanor moved about the cabin, baking bread, washing clothes, tending to chores, each task sharpened by the knowledge of what lay hidden in the shadows. Every creak of the wood, every bark of a dog outside, made her chest tighten. What if Thomas returned early? What if neighbors stopped by? At midday, she set a plate of food before her husband. Thomas ate quickly, barely looking at her. His words were sparse, practical: weather, fences, the price of flour. Not once did he ask how she was, nor notice the strain in her eyes. Eleanor studied him across the table, feeling the gulf between them widen with every unspoken thought. He was a good man in the eyes of others, hard-working and dependable. But to her, he was a stranger who shared her roof. When Thomas left again, she exhaled relief and hurried back to the corner. The Comanche, his name still unknown to her, was awake, watching. She offered him bread softened in broth, guiding it to his lips. His hand brushed hers, accidental or deliberate, she could not be sure. The touch sent a current through her, startling in its intensity. He murmured something then, a word she did not know. His voice was low, rough yet melodic. She shook her head, apologetic. "I don't understand." Still, he repeated it, softer, as though the sound itself carried meaning beyond language. Eleanor found herself smiling, an expression she had not worn in months. It frightened her. Smiles could betray secrets. Smiles could betray hearts. That evening, Thomas returned weary, his shirt damp with sweat. He collapsed onto the bed without conversation. Eleanor sat at the fire, mending his shirt, but her mind was not with the needle and thread. Her thoughts drifted to the man hidden only a few steps away, the one whose eyes spoke more to her in silence than her husband had in years of marriage. When night deepened and Thomas's snores filled the cabin, Eleanor crept softly across the floorboards. She knelt by the stranger, checking his bandages. His wound looked cleaner, less angry. She whispered, "You are healing." His lips curved into the faintest smile, and for the first time, she noticed how young he seemed beneath the weight of blood and hardship. She lingered longer than she should have, her hand resting upon his as though steadying herself. A sound outside jolted her back, hoofbeats in the distance. She darted to the window. Lanterns flickered at the edge of the settlement. Riders, perhaps a search party, moving along the ridge. Fear clawed her stomach. Were they hunting him? Or was it only her guilty conscience painting threats in every shadow? She returned to her place by the fire, sitting rigidly until the hoofbeats faded. Thomas stirred once, muttered in his sleep, then settled again. Eleanor pressed her palms together, whispering a prayer she half believed, for safety, for silence, for strength. But beneath the prayer lay something else, something she dared not name. The dangerous thrill of being needed, of being seen, even by a man who should have been her enemy. When she finally closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under, she knew one truth as surely as the dawn would come. The secret she harbored could not remain hidden forever. The line crossed. The storm rolled in at dusk, thunder shaking the cabin walls while rain hammered the roof in relentless rhythm. Eleanor moved through the dim room, lighting a single lantern. Thomas had gone to help mend a neighbor's collapsed fence, leaving her alone with the secret that consumed every waking moment. The Comanche lay propped against the wall, his color stronger now, though the wound still demanded care. Eleanor fetched clean cloth and knelt beside him. The lantern's glow flickered across his chest, bare where she had peeled away the bandage. Her fingers worked steadily, but her heart raced, betraying her calm facade. He watched her in silence, his gaze unwavering. Though she did not know his words, she felt the weight of his meaning each time his eyes met hers. It was not gratitude anymore. It was something deeper, something that mirrored the hunger she carried quietly within herself. "You're healing," she murmured, voice barely audible above the storm. "Soon you'll be strong enough to leave." But the thought brought her no comfort. The idea of his absence hollowed her chest. Her marriage had been years of quiet neglect, yet only these stolen nights had made her feel seen. His hand rose, trembling, and touched hers. Eleanor froze, the damp cloth slipping from her grip. His fingers lingered, warm against her skin, as though asking a question she had long feared to answer. "Don't," she whispered, though the word lacked conviction. She should have pulled away, should have remembered Thomas, the settlement, the danger. Instead, she remained still, her pulse racing beneath his touch. The lantern flickered, shadows dancing across the walls, concealing and revealing in equal measure. Eleanor's resolve wavered. For years she had starved on scraps of affection, convincing herself it was enough. Yet in this moment, kneeling beside the man society called her enemy, she felt a forbidden truth awaken. Her body and spirit still longed for more. He leaned closer, his breath uneven, his eyes searching hers for permission. Eleanor closed her eyes, surrendering to the storm outside and the one within. When his lips brushed hers, she did not resist. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened with a fervor that unraveled every defense she had built. Eleanor's hands, once so careful with bandages, now trembled with reckless desire. She clutched at him, not as a healer, but as a woman starved of tenderness. The sound of rain and thunder cloaked their betrayal, the cabin itself bearing witness to the moment she crossed the line she could never return from. When at last she pulled back, breathless, guilt stabbed her chest like a blade. She pressed a hand to her lips, as if to erase what had passed. "This is wrong," she whispered, though her body betrayed her words with every lingering touch. He reached for her again, his expression unreadable but his intent clear. Eleanor hesitated, torn between fear and desire. Then the thunder cracked louder, rattling the walls, and she yielded, swept away by a current stronger than reason. Their union was both desperate and tender, a collision of need and defiance. For Eleanor, it was more than passion. It was the shattering of years of silence, the reclaiming of a self she thought long buried. When the storm finally eased, she lay trembling beside him, her breath ragged, her heart heavy with conflicting truths. Shame and exhilaration warred within her. She had betrayed Thomas, betrayed the vows that bound her. Yet she also felt alive, more fully herself than in all the years of her marriage. She rose at last, gathering her skirts, smoothing her hair, trying to mask what had transpired. But no cloth could conceal the fire that lingered in her veins. She glanced toward Thomas's empty bed and felt the first sting of dread. If her husband ever discovered what she had done, no storm could wash away the consequences. Eleanor returned to her chair by the fire, staring into the fading embers. Behind her, the Comanche drifted into uneasy sleep, his breathing steady. She pressed her hands together, whispering another prayer, though this one had no words, only fear and longing entwined. Outside, the storm left the earth soaked and heavy with secrets. Inside, Eleanor knew her life had split in two, the woman she had been and the woman who now lived beneath the weight of forbidden desire. And though the rain had ceased, she sensed the greater storm had only just begun. The price of fire. Morning broke with an uneasy stillness. Eleanor stirred from the chair by the hearth, her body heavy with the weight of the night before. The Comanche still slept in the corner, his chest rising with steady breaths. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe the storm had washed away her guilt, leaving only the fragile comfort of his presence. But the world beyond her cabin walls had not forgotten, and secrets rarely kept long in a settlement built on suspicion. By midday, riders passed near the cabin. Eleanor stiffened as hooves pounded the earth, voices carrying on the wind. She moved quickly, shuttering the windows, whispering for her guests to remain silent. The men outside spoke of tracks, of raiders nearby, of blood spilled on the prairie. Her hands trembled as she clutched the latch of the door, listening until the voices faded. That evening Thomas returned, his eyes sharp, his expression shadowed with unease. "Neighbors say they saw movement near our land," he said. "Tracks lead close to here. You've noticed nothing?" Eleanor forced her voice steady. "Only the storm. Nothing more." Thomas studied her face, as if searching for cracks in her words. He said nothing further, but his silence weighed heavier than accusation. She could feel suspicion settling in the air between them. Night fell, and Eleanor crept again to the man she had sheltered, the man who had become both her solace and her ruin. She whispered, "They're searching for you. You cannot stay much longer." His dark eyes held hers, unspoken questions passing between them. She wanted to beg him to leave, yet part of her ached at the thought of losing him. The following day brought no reprieve. Just after dawn, voices rose outside. A knock thundered at the cabin door, followed by the command of a neighbor. "Thomas, come out. We believe one of them is hiding here." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Thomas opened the door, and several settlers stepped inside, rifles slung over their shoulders, eyes scanning every corner. Her heart pounded as they neared the cot. She tried to stand before them, but it was too late. A hand yanked back the blanket, and there he was, Comanche, wounded, yet unmistakably Comanche. The room erupted. Shouts filled the cabin. One man spat, "She's been harboring him." Another raised his rifle, only to be stopped by Thomas's barked order to wait. Eleanor threw herself forward, shielding Comanche with her body. "Please," she cried. "He is wounded. He is no threat." The settlers' faces twisted with fury and disgust. To them, there was no mercy in aiding an enemy, only betrayal. Their eyes burned with the judgment of a community that had no place for disobedience, let alone infidelity. Thomas's face was harder still. He stared at his wife, his jaw clenched, his hands trembling at his sides. "Eleanor," his voice cracked, more from humiliation than sorrow. "What have you done?" She could not answer. Her silence was answer enough. The weight of her betrayal hung in the air, heavier than the rifles aimed at the man she had chosen to save. The settlers dragged Comanche from the cot, pulling him toward the door. Eleanor screamed, fighting to free him, but Thomas seized her arm, holding her back with iron strength. "Enough," he said through gritted teeth. "You've shamed me before them all." Her pleas fell on deaf ears. The men mounted their horses, their captive bound, his dark eyes never leaving hers. For a fleeting instant, she saw no anger there, only a sorrow that mirrored her own. Then he was gone, swallowed by the dust of hooves. Silence returned to the cabin, but it was not peace. Thomas released her arm, as though she were a stranger. His voice was low, trembling with rage. "You brought ruin upon us. Do you know what they'll say? Do you know what I must live with?" Eleanor's throat ached with words she could not speak. She wanted to tell him she had been starving, that she had sought only to feel alive again. But none of it would matter. The truth was etched in every glance, every whisper that would spread across the settlement by morning. She sank to her knees beside the fire, tears falling soundlessly. The cabin, once her prison, now felt like a tomb. Outside, the night deepened, carrying with it the certainty that nothing would ever return to what had been. Her heart still burned with the memory of forbidden fire, but the price of that flame had been laid bare. Eleanor lifted her gaze to the door where Comanche had been taken, and a single thought echoed through her mind. This was not the end. The story was not finished. Somewhere beyond the horizon, he lived, and so too did the part of her that longed to follow.